this is an MDR platform. So basically, like the point of this tool, it kind of works like a more advanced type like SIEM almost. So what you're doing is like you have different integrations essentially, right? And you set up your platform to ingest the logs from these integrations. And integrations might be a Windows endpoint, it might be a Linux endpoint or a server. It could be your cloud provider, so like your Azure, right, and all the security that comes with that, and the CloudTrail logs, and then of course like Azure, just like AWS, but like also the whole intramess and all the cloud hosted everything, which is actually great because like again, keep going back to the SharePoint thing because it's big. Like anybody who was cloud was okay. Anybody who wasn't okay. And adminning a SharePoint server is really hard, and I think everybody pretty much knows that by this point. Um, yeah. So what we're looking at here is at Lumen. So you get your data sources from anything that's sort of security relevant, right? Like there's a way to ingest log files from IIS servers, or like think about like ingesting all your syslog data from your network appliances and stuff, right? So hopefully you get like a full scope view of not just like the endpoint, but your entire network and like all your IT assets. And they'll allow you to do like this tool, like allows you to do things like search. And something I wanted to actually start off with showing you is when you're doing an investigation, like even more so than a hunt, it's super important to be really diligent about like saving the things that you find interesting, suspicious, or that are definite indicators of the attack or have to do with it. Because a lot of times when you're digging around and you're jumping through, right, like things can start to look the same. You might see something and think like, oh, that's part of it. And then like 6 tabs later, you're like, oh, wait, where was I? So like, I'm always like a fan of like, you'll see this in AdLumen and like other tools, right? We have like UUIDs, universal unique identifiers that like identify a piece of data, right? So you can reference it and everybody can reference the same piece of data. So this way, like if you want to share a piece of information with an analyst, like across all your logs and your data sources, you can just give them like this specific log ID, and no matter like what source it came from, they're going to be able to see it. So pretty cool. I don't know if it helps. But part of that is like keeping sort of like your investigation organization, stuff like that. And hopefully your platform has things like a investigation. I want to blow this out. Sorry. Has things like an investigation manager where you can actually go ahead and like create new investigations. So like here you can see like we could start an investigation name, threat investigation.
AdLumen webinar talking about, but it's like you mentioned in the beginning, when you're doing an investigation, there's a sequence you were trying to figure out. And so as you start a workflow here of create an investigation, at the beginning of that workflow, and then you begin to add your
Yeah.
findings.
I jumped a step because like first you're gonna figure out something to start your like first you're gonna have a reason to start the investigation, but like I
Right.
wanted to make it clear that like when you're doing this, like you should be documenting everything. When I'm doing an investigation or an IR or even like an operation, right? Like I have a text file, I'm like time stamping everything, like every command I look at, every directory I'm looking at, like my thoughts, like and hypotheses, right? Like it should be like a detective, right? You have to have case notes, right? Like somebody should be able to come back to your investigation after the fact and reconstruct what you were doing and what you did so that they can say, yeah, he thoroughly checked like all of the angles that I would check, right? And that like there's not something that's unexposed. And more importantly, they can also, rebuild what happened for themselves and better understand like how to protect the network then, right? Um,
Yeah, it's the first time I've heard someone say case notes, but it makes sense. I've heard investigative report, but case notes, I think of like, one of my
oh
favorite
yeah.
series, Bosch, where he's doing an investigation. So that's basically what you're doing is you're creating the book to follow, or for someone after the fact to review it and maybe follow your footsteps of what you found.
Yeah, no, I know actually like some really good threat like what do you call like incident response people, like the folks who are like, out there doing the Fortune 500 responses when they happen, like no time to spare, like billions of dollars of risk. They actually use like voice recorders just like you would see like a medical examiner use, and like literally as they're sitting there typing going through it, like yeah, they're keeping text notes, but they're also like talking out loud. And a lot of times you'll work in pairs, right? Or you'll work with somebody else. So like you have everything sort of just like documented for reference. And again, like that's because depending on like the scope of what's happening and your compliance requirements and just your business, and maybe you want to find these guys and get them in court because they are in the US, right? Like you might actually need like that evidence preservation. You might, it might come to trial, right? So you want to make sure you got all that. You want to do it right.
Absolutely. All right. Triaging alert number 223,
Yeah,
create.
whatever. So we'll assume that we found the alert first, but so
All
we're
right.
doing that, create that.
You saw something. Now let's do something.
Yeah, so this is where you would actually see it, right? So let's say you have a dashboard, whether it's in your EDR or your, MDR product or something like that, you might get an alert that pops up. So here we have one that's like immediate action required, system enumeration detection detected. Okay, like that could be a false positive. I do see these sometimes, and a lot
What
of
is it?
times, yeah. So that's usually, so we'll look at this specific one to make sure we know exactly what this one's triggering on. But like in general, like system enumeration is when somebody's scanning the network to figure out like what services like an individual system might have, or
Mm.
seeing what systems might be available to access.
So
Um,
that's your reconnaissance stage, it sounds like.
It can be. I actually, so that's a mistake a lot of analysts make. So they think
Thanks.
that this could be, because yes, right? They think that this could be considered, yeah. They think that this could be considered a portion of the reconnaissance stage. And like that may be the case if this was a public facing asset, right? But like we know our network, we don't see a source IP here indicating that it's a public machine. Like we know how to read these logs. Um, like this is an internal machine. So like if somebody's already scanning it, they've already breached some defense layer. So
Very
something's
good.
already going else somewhere in our network that like was alerted on and resolved before and like wasn't completed, and like something's still going on, or like there's something that hasn't been detected that's going on. Maybe we don't have the antivirus installed on a Linux server that, somebody used old creds to SSH to. And they're, just doing Nmap across the entire network. This one, like you can already kind of just tell off the bat because like summarization, right? Like it's got a specific destination. So here we're probably talking about like service enumeration against a specific host. In this case, like host name, Windows, blah, blah, blah. Like, oh, let me guess, it's a Windows box probably. But maybe our customer is called Win Central, so who knows? But we'll just go to like our alert. So evidence of system enumeration has occurred. Review the account associated with the activity. Testing too. So it's interesting. There's a specific account, right? And you can look and see the evidence, like the activity involved in the execution of ipconfig.exe from the administrator account. So like we know that like the administrator account was running ipconfig.exe, um, which is associated with like enumeration. That's not something that I guess people are probably typically doing, but the issue is that like high integrity level. So it was executed from the user's administrative directory, so they were interactively logged on. Files authenticity. So we know that this was actually the legitimate Microsoft cmd.exe and what do you call it? ipconfig binary that was launched, right? It's like when you run a command in like the command prompt, like let's say you run uh what is it? Well, ipconfig, right? That's actually running ipconfig.exe in the background, right? So there's an actual executable binary that's located in like, C colon Windows system 32 slash ipconfig.exe. And like a lot of times you'll see people using the same sort of like, file names and stuff like that, but you'll see like the hashes are different, or you'll see like it's not signed. So like today, most binaries should be signed. Like even if you have like a small publisher that's providing an application or service, like most of the times these things should be signed these days. But this gives us some sort of guarantee that like this was like a legitimate binary. So maybe we're talking about like a living off the land situation, right? Because we're seeing like command.exe, ipconfig, which is again just like enumeration, trying to figure out what the system is, probably its IP address. And we can also see the raw message here. So like we definitely want to save this log because there's good stuff here where we're going to see like the logon ID, the terminal session ID, and then we can use these values to pivot, right? And see were there any other activities taken in this same logon or, in the same session. So what I'll do here is, so this is already in progress and everything like that. So we're going to go ahead and just click view. Again, just takes us to the raw log. Here we can see the exact detection query they've hit. So we can see like process name cmd.exe, these common things that we see, right? Like this could be something that maybe people don't really use it as much anymore, but like Metasploit might use, right? As part of its like initial access. Once you access the system using Interpreter, right? It runs these commands so that it can like tell you what host you're on. So from here we have like the values, all that. What you can start doing in your investigation, and like one way you can do it, and I actually don't often recommend it, is to just look at the events that surround the specific event that happened. We'll see here that this is like a Windows server. So like servers typically have a lot of file activity, or just like a lot of logs being generated in general. So like looking at plus or minus 5 minutes, like might give you 20,000 logs. So you want to be like hyper specific in terms of time if you're doing that.
So depending upon the system, what you're wanting when an alert flagged, you may want to get, okay, what happened before that alert was triggered? Or for in this case, there was a detection that we have that we roll out for all of our customers. That detection flags an alert. The alert is what you looked at where you saw the enumeration. Now you're saying, okay, let me get into the detail. And as a time window of investigation, let me look at 5 minutes plus or minus an hour plus or minus 1 day or 3 days. But your point was on servers where there's a lot of activity, be very careful of just how much data you're going to be bringing in.
Yeah, and, like, even if you're talking about, like, an endpoint, right, plus or minus 3 days, like, you're gonna be seeing a lot of activity. When you're doing things like that, you're gonna be doing a query against, like, a specific data source itself and not, like, a user or an endpoint a lot of times.